All right. So to illustrate loops, one thing that's commonly done, sometimes you gotta have the user enter a bunch of numbers for whatever reason and compute the sum or which one's the minimum or the maximum. And sometimes it is tempting to go to ask the user to go into arrays and ask the user how many numbers are you going to enter. But then you limit the user's ability to enter as many numbers as they want. However, we can have a loop. Moreover, a loop with a sentinel or some kind of variable that when it's set to a specific value, it'll exit the loop. I'll illustrate this with this idea. The idea of the following program is to have the user enter as many numbers as they want, and at the end we will output the minimum and the maximum number. Okay, so the first thing that I do is I have this little class with a scanner imported, and of course I will instantiate I'll instantiate the scanner in the program. Okay, and then I'll create some variables to hold this minimum and maximum values as we find them. I'll say the maximum to 0, so basically if I assume that they're entering values from above 0, right? And I will assume that they're entering values no bigger than 99,999, okay? So the maximum initially is at 0, because then anything that the next number that the user enters will obviously be greater than that, and then we'll start with our maximum computation. And I'll start with minimum as a very high number, so that any number that the user enters is likely to be less than this, and then we'll get the ball rolling there. So I start with the default values for maximum minimum. We'll say that if the user enters 0, they will say exit this this program. So we'll have a little bit of an integer that represents the number that the user enters. I'll just put the number 1 initially, because then I want to be looping and asking the user for a number as long as that number is greater than 0. So if they enter a negative number or 0, this will exit the program. That's why I started with number equals to 1, because I wanted to go into this loop the first time. I could have done a do while loop. That would have also worked, and then have this number initialized to 0 or something. But I want to illustrate it with a while loop. Now, at each iteration of this while loop, I'm going to ask the user to enter the numbers. So I'm going to write out system.println enter a number, and then that num, right, that variable, will be updated with the next integer. Then, what I'm going to do is I'm going to check, well, if the integer entered, num, is greater than maximum, which at the beginning is 0, so it's most likely going to be greater than maximum, and this number is greater than 0, then maximum becomes that number. So this global variable that I have here, max, will keep track of the number that has so far been the greatest. And conversely, I'll have another if this number is less than the minimum, and of course the number is greater than 0, then the minimum here becomes that number. Okay, so in min, I will be storing always the one that is the smallest number. In max, I will always be storing the one that's greater than the previous maximum. So basically, I'll be storing the maximum number. And this is basically the loop. So then at the end, I just print line, the maximum is max and the minimum is min. So let's compile this guy and run it. Here, enter a number, 4, 5, 6, 98, 78, and 1. So the maximum is 98, the minimum is 1 so far. I'll enter 0, and it says the maximum is 98, the minimum is 1. The beauty of this is that I do not limit the user. The user can enter as many things as they want. The second thing is I don't need to resort to arrays or any other structure to store these things, because these can be computed and tracked as they are entered. Okay. Now, some pitfalls that you might run into when coding this. Well, why do we need this num0 here? Well, by the way, this is the code that works. What I'm going to do next will not work correctly. I'm just going to explain why. So let's say you start with this. This is the most basic intuition. Say if number is greater than maximum, then update the maximum. If the number is less than minimum, then update the minimum. What happens with this is the following. So let's enter a couple of numbers, 3, 4, and 5, and then 0 to finish. It says the minimum is 0, because the minute you enter that 0 went here and replaced the minimum. That's why we needed the condition that zeros won't update maximum or minimum. Okay? That's why we needed those. Now the other thing that you might be tempted to do is this. If the number is greater than the maximum, then update the maximum. Otherwise, if the number is less than the minimum, then update the minimum. Right? Now the problem with this is best illustrated when you enter only one number. So if I enter one number, 3, that's the only number I enter. Okay? What is the maximum? 3. What is the minimum? 3. Well, what happens is the minimum is 99999. Okay? Why is that? Well, because it entered and computed and updated the maximum, and then it never got into the minimum computation because of this else over here. Right? That's why you need these statements as two separate ifs, because a number can be both the maximum and the minimum as well. Okay? That concludes this video.